Good morning, everyone. This morning is Sunday, April 26, 2020, and we welcome you all to our roundtable discussion. This morning we are recording from the North Star Cottage. We're so glad you all could join us and begin with our morning prayer.
From page 223 of Miscellaneous Writings. May divine love so permeate the affections of all those who have named the name of Christ in its fullest sense, that no counteracting influence can hinder their growth or taint their examples. Mary Baker Eddy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our watching point.
Watch number 353. Watch that you bear in mind that air is no more than mist that forms on your eyeglasses when you enter a warm house in the winter and causes everything to seem blurred. If all the eye beholds is an image of mortal thought reflected on the retina, as Science and Health says, then the obvious conclusion is that our work is always to clear up our own mental vision. Once a boy was injured by a train. A scientist who was passing by picked him up to take him home. On the way, the boy recovered, however, so that he was soon able to walk. When Mrs. Eddy heard about this case, she questioned the student and asked him how he treated the boy. He said, quote, "But Mrs. Eddy, I did not treat the boy. I knew that I could not be mesmerized." She replied, "That is all you ever have to do." End quote.
Thank you. Comments on that?
It's such a powerful watch, really, because it really tells us that at all times, no matter what comes, it does require our consent. If we refuse to consent, where is it?
Thank you.
Perfect. And that is why it's important to know what the truth really is. That's why we study the textbook. That's why we have these sessions.
Yeah.
So that when the counterfeit tries to appear, we don't consent to it.
Yeah, this is a matter every day of staying demesmerized from what the carnal mind would try to tell us is true and real. That's what we're doing in handling this name of nothing. And I call it that because, well, I remember Mrs. Evans in going over the Lord's Prayer, hallowed be thy name. Only the name of God should ever be hallowed. We don't give power to something that he never made, nor do we give it a highfalutin name. That is in her article on Materia Medica. Man cannot be bewitched or mesmerized by alluring or high-sounding phrases or methods. Materia Medica gives all these things, these names, and then we end up fearing those names. Well, hallowed be thy name. So you keep this nameless nothing in the realm of dreams and stay demesmerized by it. And that's by keeping you. And by knowing the truth. And we, as I've talked about, we have this time right now to work it out. I thought it was beautiful in Parthen's blog. He talked about someone in England who was in a very serious accident and at first was surrounded with people and I think was finding it hard to work. And then she prayed and then she went home. She'd been visiting somewhere and she went home and had a few-hour drive back. And she thought, how in the world would I be able to get home because she was in such terrible pain? And then she realized, no, she thought of Jesus in the tomb for 3 days and said, wow, this is a wonderful time to work out the problem of being. And so she took that quiet time she had, even though at that time she was in terrible pain, and began working it out. And Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days. Well, by the end of the 3 days, she was completely well of those serious results of that accident. So, so anyway, it was a beautiful story. And we have this time now, again, to be working out the problem of being, to get into our closets and pray, not be so anxious to just get back together or whatever else you want to do, which I know we all want to do, but we've been given this time. And the latest I heard on my pop-up phone thing was one of the so-called doctors was saying, well, by the end of May, and we had a very good Bible study yesterday, and the end of May, my understanding is Pentecost. Okay, so we've really had this time from around Easter, a little before Easter, to Pentecost, which is the arrival of the Holy Ghost, which has been with us, the divine science, to work out the problem of being. And then let's know it will go as quickly as it came. In the future watches, we're going to handle all of these so-called predictions with, oh, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. The hell they say. That is just, it reminds me of that story I've told many times, the devil chasing the man, and the man is running and running and running. Finally, the devil catches up to him, and the man says, what are you going to do with me? What are you going to do with me? And the man says,
The devil said.
Oh, sorry, the devil said,
It's your dream.
It's your dream. So we're not going to continue dreaming this dream. We're going to break the mesmerism, just as the person did for that little boy, the woman did when she was in that so-called accident. Both were accidents, not the truth. God never said it. That's how we gain the dominion over it. And we know there's no return of something that what?
That was never there.
Thank you. It was never there in the first place. This has just been a dream, mortal mind dream. So stay above it. And it was interesting because the watching point mentions the mist. And Frank, our German friend in Canada, he told me, now I pray I pronounce these right, but Uta's there, she can correct me. Laban is supposed to be, no, Nabal is mist. And then he said, if you reverse the spelling of that, it's Laban, which means life. So the mist is really death, the death of the Adam dream. But reversing that, you get life, and life everlasting.
Yeah.
And The Way by Mrs. Eddy in miscellaneous writing, she says, strike out right and left against the mist never clears the vision, but to lift your head above it is a sovereign panacea. So don't get upset with the mist.
Don't argue with it.
Don't argue with it.
Don't have a conversation with it.
Or consent to it.
Or consent to it. Rise above it. And as we talked about yesterday, be grateful. God's given us this time. I mean, we have all these Sabbath days. They're Sabbath days, and we will keep them holy. And we'll do this work with joy and thanksgiving. And He can do anything, so we don't have to worry about, if we worry about the economy, that's not helping the economy. If we worry about the physical problems, that's not helping. Our God is good, and He loves us all.
I was thinking about the Pentecost that you brought up and how, when we, by doing this work and being together, that the end result of the original one was that everybody heard the truth in their own language. So
Thank you. It's a wonderful thought. Yes, that's what Bruce was saying yesterday too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And we had on the noteworthy news, I think it's still there, about Susa. Is it called Susa? Well, anyway, about in Los Angeles,
1907.
1908. When Mrs. Eddy was still
The
around.
Azusa Street Mission.
Yes.
They had the same experience. It was obviously very sincere people that got together and prayed and worshiped God. And they had that experience where they had people from other nationalities, even Japanese and Spanish, obviously English, and I think there were others as well. They all understood what was being said. They had that experience. They got the Spirit.
Yes. Yeah, it came, that Spirit. And as we pray, too, that more and more are getting the Spirit, it's ever present, ever with us. May thy word enrich the affections of all mankind and govern them. That's the plan.
And one more thing about the Azusa Street Mission. It happened at the time when Mary Baker Eddy was with us.
1908. Yes. And then what did we hear, Linda? There was another one, right? Was it
We went to North Korea, actually, where the capital is, begins with a P.
Oh, yeah.
Pyongyang.
Yeah, yes, and they had it during that time. There was a revival there in that time period.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Isn't that? And that truth is operating now. And as we've said, there are 100 million Christians in China. And more people, I was reading more and more people, you never know it by reading the news or listening to the news, but more and more people are converting to Christ Christianity all across the world. I know Florence knows it. She sees it in various countries, including her own. So, or her original country, I should say.
And why not?
And why not?
Because it is the truth. And the truth is unstoppable. And as we work out the problem of being for ourselves during this time, we work it out also for our nation. Our nation needs healing. And as we work it out for our nation, we work it out for all mankind. Because our nation is a beacon of hope for all mankind.
Yeah. Don't ever think your prayers don't amount to much. That's just what Era would like you to do. They amount to everything. And one with God is a majority. Anyone else? All right, our subject today, probation after death. The golden text is Psalm 17. As for me, I will behold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. Okay, Jeremy.
Well, this has really spoken to me this week. And, growing up, I had a lot of people say that I was ugly, and it really became like this core belief that I had, apparently. But coming here and learning all I've learned here, I don't know, when I read that this week, just really, I don't know, kind of showed me how to turn that around and look at it the right way. And that I have the ability every day to reflect God. So it's all up to me whether or not I'm, reflecting beauty or not. So I'm just really grateful for that. It's been I feel quite a bit lighter, actually.
I know, what an honest admission to write about. And how many of us have maybe struggled with that sort of thing. And how cruel of anyone to say that. How terribly cruel. And
Actually, it's pitiful because they don't know what beauty is.
That's exactly right, Florence. People who say things like that don't have, that they have so squelched their spiritual sense that it's like non-existent in them anymore. And
Mhm.
think what they're missing out on, that they would see something like that they would not see God's creation all around them. Because that's what this really says. I will behold thy face in righteousness. In other words, I will see God at work, doing right and doing good all around me. And when I awake out of this mesmeric belief of life in matter and intelligence in matter, awake out of that mesmeric wrong belief, I will be satisfied with everything that God is and everything God does. You know, I've taken up the habit to get up in the morning after I declare that God is mind and God is my mind. I thank God for life. I thank God for the privilege of being his image and likeness. And it sets a whole different tone for the day. To start out thanking God for the privilege of his creating us in his image and likeness.
Thank you. And that's being grateful for life, truth, and love, as Mrs. Eddy says in the chapter on prayer. Are we grateful for life, truth, and love? We all have that. And I have to say, too, it never, ever once occurred to me that Jeremy would fit under the word ugly, because he radiates so much good and love and life and joy. Never even passed my thought. Nor do I think anyone else who knows him would have thought that. And someone else told me that, too, that as a child, she was told these things. And it's almost shocking to me. I never would have thought that about her.
Wow. Also, likeness refers to our ability.
Who's speaking? Craig, we're getting a lot of noise.
Boy, are you still getting it?
Not now.
No.
Oh, but likeness also refers to that we're able to do so much more good, not just our sense of presence. And, you know, God is capable of so much. Well, if something's needed, we can meet the need. It made me feel good when I woke up, not to feel limited.
Yes. Thank you. And we know, too, how unhappy many people are who are obsessed with their looks. It's one of the traps of the carnal mind, of the devil. They're certainly not attractive. Anyone who's obsessed with their looks, I don't find it attractive. It's not attractive.
No.
No, it can be.
And in a couple of old healing thoughts, I've given you these before, but they're very beautiful statements. I actually have them framed in my bathroom. But anyway, one is by Florence Gubbins. In truth, we have no beauty of our own apart from God. And then William Gannett. Whoever would be fairer, illumination must begin in the soul. The face catches the glow only from that side. Soul, we read in those pages in Science and Health, 244 to 248, which handle the beliefs of age and also speaks of beauty. Soul is an expression of beauty, and it's God-given, and every one of God's children has it. You couldn't possibly not have it. And so instead of worrying about your looks, worry about your thoughts. I thought this was so interesting in Japan, the women who want to look, thinking about looking beautiful, they meditate on peaceful and joyful and loving thoughts.
It's like they have a sense that the beauty comes from within.
Yes.
And that's where they have to start.
Yes. So.
In Collectania, I read something which I think is Mrs. Eddy is telling us what's more important. It's on page 62, and she says, God has not given us vast learning to solve all the problems or unwilling wisdom to direct all the wanderings of our brothers' lives, but He has given to every one of us the power to be spiritual, and by our spirituality, to lift and enlarge and enlighten the lives we touch. And this was written by Philip Brooks in 1906. But underneath it, Mrs. Eddy wrote, "The secret of my life is in the above." So, nothing about being beautiful and all that stuff. So.
That's exactly right. How much good we do.
Yes.
And I liked what Craig mentioned earlier. The likeness of God is infinite. There's no limitation to God. Therefore, there's no limitation to us as His likeness.
And, you know, Mrs. Eddy loved beauty. And Migdal Young says there won't be anything ugly in the kingdom of heaven. So beauty is not something wrong, because if it's part of soul, it's part of us, and we should be grateful for it and acknowledge it. But again, it comes from the inside out, not from the outside in.
And I think, well, and I think Miss Eddy says right somewhere, I'm not sure where it is, that how could a friend be anything other than beautiful?
Yes,
Exactly.
Science and health.
Yeah.
If we see incorrectly, then how can they be ugly the way whatever the thought is about that?
Well, it says in Science and Health that Jesus beheld the perfect man. So whatever comment somebody's making, they're just talking about what's bouncing around in their own head and not the object in front of them.
Thank you, yeah. And Mrs. Eddy says, beauty is a thing of life which dwells forever in the internal mind and reflects the charms of His goodness in expression, form, outline, and color. So think of yourself in all those ways. You're expressing the charms of His goodness in expression, form, outline, and color. What else is there? And then it is love which paints the petal with myriad hues, glances in the warm sunbeam, arches the clouds with a bow of beauty, blazons the night with starry gems, and covers the earth with loveliness. And that goes back to Florence's quote. It's in the good deeds that you do that make you beautiful and lovely. And that's why a so-called physically beautiful person, according to human standards, can be very ugly. Because if they're not expressing the joy and the life and the love, then not going to work.
I just remember the Jeremy's post in the forum reminds me also, or when I was reading it, the push that they have in the magazines and models and so forth. And I remember there was a time that it was very prevalent, and it was like the standard for beauty to look almost like you were a heroin addict. They portrayed these models. No, they did. And actually that was what they were looking for. And thinking back, I said, well, how awful. This was showing these young girls or whatever, in order to look like this model, you have to be. I believe one of them eventually died of AIDS because she did end up. She was a heroin addict. But that was like put forward in all the magazines as the epitome of beauty and how people should look like. So, it's very wrong message to send, especially young girls and young people, portraying all these distorted images of what the man or woman of God should look like.
That's why the corrupt media needs to be torn down and rebuilt.
Yes.
in God's image.
Yes. Thank you, Pilar. It's so true. And we have some of our youth troubled by that. They think they have to be so skinny, or they're not beautiful. I mean, it's unrealistic. And it's so wrong, so terribly wrong. So, yes. Yeah.
Yep. The human mind always gets it wrong.
Well, it's kind of funny because I grew up very, very skinny and was horribly taunted for being skinny and told, that was very unattractive. So mortal mind just is all screwy as far as I can tell. So all these people say, oh, you're so lucky to be skinny. Well, no, I didn't really like that so much because it wasn't so, it seems to me.
Wasn't in fashion.
Well, I guess not. But when being here and learning more about spiritual sense and beauty and working with a practitioner, I'm getting more sense that the universe is just beautiful and we have to see it. But this was just material sense because I never really cared about the beauty that they were trying to say, but it did hurt to be felt like you were being cast out, and that's what needed to be dealt with. But that was just material sense, so I didn't even know what it was saying. And if I had understood that, then I probably
Thank you.
would have laughed at
The
it.
human mind can be very cruel.
Yeah.
Like Mrs. Eddy said, it's never been kind enough to me to want to linger in it, so I stayed out of it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And a lot of it, you never know what motivates people. Sometimes
Right.
it's just plain jealousy when people are in the wrong mind. But as you get to know yourself as God's child, I mean, He adjusts form, expression, outline, color. Whatever's right for you to be, your size, whatever's right for you. And we're all different. Thank God for that. Everybody's different, so we don't compare ourselves to someone else's. We're different. We're each a unique expression of Him. So, and since I'm going to have Jeremy read, he brought up
Can I
this center.
just say something quick here? One of the beauties of not attending church in Plainfield, but by phone, is that I don't have that personal sense of anybody. I had to judge people by what they said from their heart versus seeing a visual of people.
Thank you very much, Mike.
That's good. That's why we only broadcast
That's
audio
it.
and not visual.
That's right,
That's
because
right.
people have pressed us to do that. And they want to see us. Well, you come to Plainfield if you really want to see us, but no. And I find it very distracting if I'm ever on, FaceTime. I just as soon not see the person. I find it distracting. Just hear your voice. That's all I need is your voice. And I meet you. I know you all through your presence and your voices. And as you know us, it's very distracting. You start looking around. I mean, if we were to have the church and they're looking around and what people are wearing or who knows what, as your mind wanders here, there, and everywhere. So, no, thank you. No, thank you. That's my granddaughter. No, thank you. She learned that in kindergarten. So, anyway.
Jesus told that story, and the line
yes.
from it is, "What went ye forth to see?"
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah. Or then you have, we've heard so many stories. I think Melissa was telling me in Connecticut, people, they come into church and they don't meet what you think they should look like or something, and you're not.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's terrible. You're judging unrighteous judgment.
Oh, there is a little of that, yes.
A little of that. Uh-huh.
And I saw too when people came to church and they were dressed a certain way, nobody talked to them afterwards. I saw that.
Yep.
Well, who knows? Some of you are coming here in your pajamas, and we would never tell you. So.
Supposed to be justified or condemned by our work.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, anyway,
Jeremy,
I did. I know. In Jeremy's post, he introduced a most beautiful story, true story, that I'm going to have him read because it goes with our lesson on probation after death. And we found this in the box of Eustace. When we got the Eustace Foundation, we were given many boxes of things of his. And this story, I believe, was written by his secretary. I think her name was Mildred Bean. But I've never seen it anywhere else. And I give it to people who are, struggling with someone who has passed on. So, Jeremy.
There is no death. Shortly before the passing of my husband, I had a strange but precious experience I would like to relate. I had gone out and was driving my car when, without any apparent reason, I made a complete U-turn in the middle of a block and returned home. I rushed to the door and I found my husband sitting in his chair, lifeless. I mentally uttered the statement, "Dear God, what should I do now?" I looked through the doorway out into the garden, and as I did so, I was reminded of the statement, "There is no death." I noticed then my husband's eyelashes began to move. He sat up, and I helped him into the kitchen. I prepared him some lunch, and when we sat down, he put his hand on mine and said, "Dear, do you know what happened?" Of course, I was speechless because I knew something tremendous was going on. And then he said, "There is no death, and I have proven it by coming back and telling you so." He told me when he realized he had made the change, his one thought was, "I must go back and tell you what has happened." Then he said, "When you came in and found me on the chair, you said, 'God, what shall I do now?' I tried to tell you, 'Here I am,' but you looked right through me, and then I knew the only way I could prove this to you was by sitting back in my chair." He continued by saying, "This I cannot do again because I must go and not come again." I asked him, "Will you see our friend Dee?" He said, "She never left you." And I asked again, "Will you see your mother?" And he replied, "I have already talked with her." Then he tried to tell me how wonderful it was, but I could not understand. He asked me to promise him two things. One was, "Do not grieve, because there is no separation." And the other, "Do not be offended by anyone, for they do not know you as you really are. If they did, they would love you." He ate the lunch I had prepared for him, and shortly after that quietly finished his course. I found his body in the bathroom, but knew even before I found him that he was gone. I had never doubted his ascension, and I have never been to the grave or even sent a flower there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
We can thank her for recounting that experience for us.
Yes.
and there it is. And when we mourn for those who seem to have left this experience, ultimately we are mourning for ourselves, because as this described, I don't know, I don't think a lot about it, but those who have gone and come back say it's a wonderful experience, a wonderful place, and so to drag them back into this experience is, you really don't necessarily want to do that unless it's not their time to have gone. And then that is possible, as in the story of Lazarus or in the story of Christ Jesus. And but I thought that was so beautiful. And what he told her, he didn't tell her much, but it was wonderful, wasn't it?
Mm.
Very comforting right now, I'm sure.
Very comforting. And also, you do see your loved ones again. He had already seen all these people, and yeah, it was just very, very comforting. Yes. So, and I love in the Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And then surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever."
It's a long time. forever.
Yes, how beautiful is that? Say the Lord's Prayer, this prayer, the 23rd Psalm, to yourself often and think about what that means. Surely, not maybe, but surely you will dwell in the house of the Lord.
Not just for a little time,
Yes.
but forever.
And goodness and mercy shall follow you all the days of your life. So that's going on now. Goodness and mercy is following us. Right now, right here, could not be otherwise. So then we do get into the story of Lazarus and Karen, and it's a good thing. She was asking herself on the forum, what more can she learn from that story? Karen, you want to address that? She's here. Karen, we don't hear you if you're speaking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I always knew that part of this story was that he gave thanks first, but somehow this time it's just the importance of the fact that, let me just read what I have. I asked myself what new inspiration, what came to me was who made the first move and why. Jesus did not need Lazarus to come forth before he lifted up his eyes and say, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. He knew that thou hearest me always. But because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. Then he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth. Jesus knew he could give thanks to God because he had had so many proofs already of God's power. He also knew who had authority. It wasn't the mortal picture that everyone around him was seeing, but it was what Christ was knowing that had all the authority. So this is the reminder to me that before I even ask God for anything that I think I need or desire, I must first begin with, I know that thou hearest me always, and is why I am so grateful for all the good already received. I know that you are the one and only source of all good, and am so grateful to be learning this. I know my prayer has already been answered, because as the Bible says, before they call, I will answer. And after I posted that, I realized ever since then, before I watch, before I pray, before I ask, I've been doing that. I've been saying, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and I knew that thou hearest me always. That's how I begin. And I thought that's how I must always begin before I even start a treatment or anything. That's how I'm going to begin now. And it's just helped me so much to, before you call, I will answer. I mean, so it really hit home this week, that aspect of that experience was what Jesus did first. And it was, anyway.
No, that's a wonderful, important point, because to get back to one of the stories that Mary mentioned earlier, the only thing we have to do is to not be mesmerized. The only thing we have to do is to see clearly who and what God is and what he does for us. That's all we ever have to do. And to thank God beforehand, first, is setting our vision more clearly on what is true and what is real. That's a very important point. Thank you.
And you should have, if you haven't, but made a covenant with God that you are obeying him to the very best of your ability. And in doing that, he blesses you as his child. So it's not far-fetched to know that he always hears you and he answers your prayers. And as you grow in this science, you do find that to be so true. Mrs. Eddy said similar thing as Jesus did, that everything I ask God for, he grants to me. And if we ask according to his will, not to consume it upon our lusts, why wouldn't he answer it? We just have to get where we know where we're in line with what he would have us to do and to be. And go ahead.
No, I was just saying he grants it because our asking grows to become more righteous. It's not anymore, I want this. No.
Thank you. That's the key.
God answers righteous prayer.
Righteous, unselfed prayer, yes.
Yeah, Mrs. Eddy, just, to get back to the raising of Lazarus, Mrs. Eddy refers to Jesus as the most scientific man who ever trod the globe. Yeah. Jesus knew this science. He had been taught of God this science. He couldn't explain it all to his disciples because they weren't ready for it. That's why he said, the Comforter will come. But he knew what it was. He knew that life is eternal. He knew that Lazarus had not died. He knew it. But he also knew that he was there to demonstrate that fact to everybody else who was around him.
Someone else trying to speak?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm looking for it now, but there's a comment in Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown, and I think it's from Jeremiah, where the commentary, he says that, I can't remember but it says that the desire that we have, that we're feeling, that we're praying for, the commentary says the desire is God's desire. He wants you to pray for it because it's coming. You can't have the desire is God's because it's his desire for you. And when I read that for the first time, I thought, wow, so the desire that I'm having is God's, not mine, because he's already answered it, but I need to pray for it, or, because demand and supply are equal.
Thank you.
It's very comforting.
It's true. No, he puts those desires in our heart, many of them. We wouldn't have them, especially when we're striving to obey and listen to him. So, yes. And I know there was a calendar statement we had. Elsie had sent it to us. I think it was from the Cherokee Indians about thanking God for the blessings that are on their way.
Yeah.
Similar thing where they're coming from God. They're on their way. We have to just see it manifest. Anne from England sent this about this story. She sent a couple of things, but one was, I found something by Spurgeon about the raising of Lazarus, which was speaking about how both sisters had great faith in Jesus, but that Martha couldn't see that a blessing could be there for them in the present, only that would happen sometime in the future. It made me think that I need to try to see God's blessings more in my own life and not in the future. And what did Martha say? Oh, it's going to happen in the resurrection. And so, no, it was going to happen right that day. And very often we put off our good and don't see it as being right here, present with us. Now, what was the difference between the Martha thought and the Mary thought?
Mary sat at Jesus' feet.
Thank you. That story about the when he came in and Martha was all rushing around doing this, that, and the next thing, and Mary just sat quietly at his feet.
And Martha complained that she was doing all the work.
Yeah, she complained.
And Jesus had to rebuke her, saying, well, no, because your sister Mary has chosen the right thing. She has chosen to learn about God.
And Yeah, and in this story too, it was Martha was the one, the more of the unbelieving one, while Mary was not. And I thought about this, and Spurgeon in this, there is an article he writes about it too, that he talks about this Martha thought, and that the Martha thought is the intellectual one. He doesn't say that, but it is. It just doesn't quite get it. It can't connect the dots. Doesn't connect the dots. Now, I used to be one that could not connect the dots. In other words, the words are lovely. Oh my gosh, I just could read all this Christian Science literature. It makes me feel so good. But my life's a mess. Okay, you haven't connected the dots. And we all have to come to the point of connecting the dots. And this is why we have these roundtables, to teach you how to connect the dots. And in the new birth, and this is what Linda was speaking about, the article by Mrs. Eddy in Miscellaneous Writings. She says, now, dear reader, pause for a moment with me, earnestly to contemplate this newborn spiritual altitude, for this statement demands demonstration. Here you stand, face to face with the laws of infinite spirit, and behold for the first time the irresistible conflict between the flesh and spirit. You stand before the awful detonations of Sinai. You hear and record the thunderings of the spiritual law of life as opposed to the material law of death, the spiritual law of love as opposed to the material sense of love, the law of omnipotent harmony and good as opposed to any supposititious law of sin, sickness, or death. And before the flames have died away on this mount of revelation, like the patriarch of old, you take off your shoes, lay aside your material appendages, human opinions, and doctrines. Give up your more material religion with its rites and ceremonies. Put off your materia medica and hygiene as worse than useless to sit at the feet of Jesus. This is connecting the dots. And if you're not willing to go through all this process, you won't connect the dots. You can't just jump into it. You've got to take this process. And Mrs. Eddy is telling us again and again how to do it. But there's so many Christian Scientists who haven't read her textbook. They certainly haven't read prose works. You've got to read it. And we're connecting the dots now in this period of time where we're working. Are you impressed? I mean, look at all the examples she gave in that. Which side are you on? What are you acknowledging as to be true? And are you sitting at the feet of Jesus? Or are you rushing around thinking you have to do this, that, or the next thing, and not spending the time in the tomb to work out problems of being?
And this is the time to sit at the feet of Jesus and allow that truth to have its work. Let it come through.
Yes. So, for those of you who feel you're not connecting the dots, you just keep working on it. And that means by reading the word and not having it evidenced in your life. And as Florence has said many, many times, and it is so true, you're waiting for some super demonstration to happen. In the meantime, all kinds of good things are going on. You don't even notice them or are grateful for them or acknowledge them. Well, what's with that? And do you expect to receive something more when you haven't acknowledged all the things that have happened along the road? You're just waiting for this one stupendous healing you think you must have? And until you do, you're going to whine and complain and be miserable? Forget about it.
That reminds me of the article I told you about, Mary, Be It Slow or Fast by Samuel Greenwood.
Yes.
In that he says that God knows what you need first. So all the things that, you're looking for a particular healing right now, but you don't ignore all the other things going on because he knows what should come first.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. Samuel Greenwood was a wonderful early writer. Yes, he knows what you have need of. And you're just ignoring. I want my healing. I don't really care how I should change.
Ding ding. Carpenter says not to even cherish a desire for healing until you're ready or fitted for it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the human mind's not satisfied until it has to see something really dramatic, always enamored with the drama. But spiritual sense is content with God's omnipresence, and He is always here.
Thank you.
And I think that's why sometimes your faith healing is popular, because, okay, the physical thing is healed, but what about the moral change that should have gone on, never touched? So we continue to suffer.
And you see, this is real Christian Science healing. It's not faith cure. This is a transformation of you, and it's very different. And you have to be willing to take up the cross and do this work. And if you're not, then just go and take your medication and go do something else. But don't claim it unless you really want to do this. The benefits are tremendously overwhelming if you do, but it takes some work. So before we close, there are just a couple more things, because Jeremy says I have a little more time. Okay. Well, one is that, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, he shall live. Spurgeon brings out the point, believeth in me. He doesn't say love me. He doesn't say follow me, or he says believeth in me. And Mrs. Eddy's definition of believing in science and health is most interesting, because generally speaking, we think belief isn't very good, and that's true. Understanding is what is important. But in this case, her definition, believing, firmness and constancy, not a faltering nor a blind faith, but the perception of spiritual truth.
That's what Jesus meant.
Yes. And that is one of the definitions we were asked to memorize. It's an important one. That is what he meant. And those who do this believing in him will have everlasting life. But it is the understanding. And then one other thing that I wanted to give you today. This was in One Cause and Effect, and it applies to what's going on today, and it's in Miscellaneous Writings on page 22, where Mrs. Eddy says about divine science shows the impossibility of transmitting human ills or evil from one individual to another, that all true thoughts revolve in God's orbit. They come from God and return to him, and untruths belong not to his creation. Therefore, these are null and void. It hath no peer, no competitor, for it dwelleth in him, besides whom there is none other. That is Christian Science. And take that thought and use it during the day. It's impossible of transmitting human ills or evil from one individual to another. Impossible.
Can you repeat where that's from?
Miscellaneous Writings, page 22, her article, One Cause and Effect.
Thank you.
And then the story, someone asked a practitioner, well, what if your daughter came down with, I don't know what, scarlet fever? And his answer was, impossible. Don't even go there. Okay. We will end with unity of good.
Unity of good. In divine science, the dying, if they die in the Lord, awake from a sense of death to a sense of life in Christ, with a knowledge of truth and love beyond what they possessed before, because their lives have grown so far toward the stature of manhood in Christ Jesus that they are ready for a spiritual transfiguration through their affections and understanding. Those who reach this transition, called death, without having rightly improved the lessons of this primary school of mortal existence, and still believe in matter's reality, pleasure, and pain, are not ready to understand immortality. Hence, they awake only to another sphere of experience and must pass through another probationary state before it can be truly said of them, "Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord." They upon whom the second death, of which we read in the Apocalypse, Revelation 20, verse 6, hath no power, are those who have obeyed God's commands and have washed their robes white through the sufferings of the flesh and the triumphs of spirit. Thus they have reached the goal in divine science, by knowing him in whom they have believed. This knowledge is not the forbidden fruit of sin, sickness, and death, but it is the fruit which grows on the tree of life. This is the understanding of God, whereby man is found in the image and likeness of good, not of evil, of health, not of sickness, of life, not of death.
Thank you all for joining us today. We love you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.